A lot of people all over the political spectrum of internet politics frequently bemoan identity politics. Right-wing people tend to frame it as woke and overly divisive. Left-wing people, those who oppose it, that is, tend to view it as a distraction from the real issues.
But more importantly, I think that it distracts from the issues that people do genuinely care about.
Yes.
And what it does is it provides campaigning tools for Democrats who want to deflect from core issues that materially impact Americans' lives, right? Like, don't give them material for their part in the culture wars.
Interestingly, this is most contentious on the left. Those who deprioritize the so-called social issues, like gay marriage, abortion, racial justice issues, the drug war, etc., in favor of more economic-centric issues like income inequality, universal health care, and climate change, are accused of being class reductionists.
But I have noticed there are some people who I'd consider proper leftists, usually Marxists, who are very sometimes keen to reduce any given social dynamic exclusively to a class one.
Their defense is typically that these broader issues disproportionately affect supposedly marginalized communities, so that by pursuing such an agenda, they're killing two birds with one stone, and that it's more palatable to the general public.
The people who are most interested and most obsessed with that topic, you're more likely to get wins if you frame these things in a class-conscious way first and foremost. In other words, you actively push people away, turn people off, make them dislike you more and dislike your issues more if you frame it in a racialized way. Universal solutions actually close the racial wealth gap and close and ameliorate race issues the most.
There is certainly something to this. There are good reasons to believe that by, for example, talking about things in a race-neutral way, you're more likely to appeal to a wider swath of the public. The thing is, even if you do that and take other rhetorical measures, you still inevitably come across identity. There's a reason that the central theme of the book, Democracy for Realists, is that people primarily vote along identity lines. The mistake people tend to make is that they reduce identity to one's race, immigration status, gender, or sexual orientation. So-called class reductionists are reductionist in their views of both human motivation and identity itself. Humans are indeed motivated by advancing their material well-being, but that's only part of the puzzle. People who focus primarily on so-called economic issues tend to overlook this. As Francis Fukuyama wrote in his book Identity, The Demand for Dignity and the Politics of Resentment, as important as material self-interest is, human beings are motivated by other things as well, motives that better explain the disparate events of the present. This might be called the politics of resentment. In a wide variety of cases, a political leader has mobilized followers around the perception that the group's dignity had been affronted, disparaged, or otherwise disregarded. This resentment engenders demand for public recognition of the dignity of the group in question. A humiliated group seeking restitution of its dignity carries far more emotional weight than the people simply pursuing their economic advantage. The various groups that people belong to are oftentimes their various forms of identity. Yes, this can include a person's race, sexual orientation, gender, immigration status, and all the rest, but it can also include one's occupation, their regional identity, their political leanings, and essentially anything else that can be seen as a defining quality or a sign of status in society at large. When you put forth a given policy, people tend not to look at it through the lens of rational calculation about their material well-being. Instead, they're much more likely to look at it emotionally, through the lens of identity. Doing basic things like protecting property and enforcing contracts is necessarily going to intrude on identities because their policies are necessarily going to pick and choose what lifestyles they are advantaging. This can happen in very subtle, oftentimes unintended ways. For example, here in the United States, on your federal taxes, you can deduct the interest you pay on your mortgage, but you cannot deduct the rent you pay. Some states allow certain deductions for rent paid, but it is nowhere near the tax advantage that the mortgage interest deduction is. This necessarily privileges people who own properties over those who rent them, and in a subtle way incentivizes ownership. You can argue that this is a good policy overall, but it's undeniably a way in which the federal government puts its thumb on the scale. Of course, owners and renters exist across basically all lines of society, so this typically isn't thought of as an identity issue. Then again, most of the examples I'm going to provide aren't. That's kind of the point of this video. Let's take a look at some examples where the implications for identity are a little more clear. Take the example of student loan forgiveness. Proponents of this tend to think that you're helping some people out at no real cost to anyone else. Therefore, opposition to it is highly irrational.
Democrats are saying, actually, no, this is not only bad, but it's going to piss off the working class because, like, one of these dipshit conservatives on Twitter said that they'd be angry because they paid off their student loans. Like, what kind of logic is that? I paid off my student loan, so nobody else should have student debt forgiveness. Okay, well, I mean, like, we had a global pandemic last year, year before, and how many people died in 2020 that didn't have the vaccine? Should we not have given people the vaccine in 2021 because it would be unfair to all of the people who died in 2020? I mean, this is an argument like against ever doing anything because people who don't benefit from that would view it as unfair. It's just, it's ridiculous.
Of course, even from the standpoint of economic well-being, this does not make some people better off at no cost to other people. All that money that went to pay for the schooling and all the money that will pay off the private sector debt didn't come from nowhere. The government got it from taxes or from borrowing it, which will only have to be paid back later with interest by taxpayers. On top of that, there's also the moral hazard, the fact that none of this addresses the causes of inflating college tuition, and a whole host of other issues that deserve to be explored in their own right. But for now, let's ignore all of those issues and try and look at this from the standpoint of identity. Do that, and you'll realize why this is such a politically toxic issue. Where I grew up, going to college was an expectation. This isn't the case in a lot of places in this country. In some communities, it's even looked down upon. By paying off the debts of those who took out money to attend college, you are necessarily subsidizing the lives of people who chose very different career paths, and may have very different values, than those who chose not to pursue a college degree. This problem will only be compounded if free college for all is pursued as well. Your average four-year university is generally a place of very liberal values. By paying for the education of people to attend these universities, you're necessarily subsidizing not only the institutions that promote these values, but in effect the values themselves by putting up no cost to entry, at the expense of the entire nation, including working class people and all non-liberals who pay taxes. Even if you think free college is a good idea in principle, you should be cognizant of the fact that you're necessarily going to create resentment from certain parts of the population. Let's consider another issue that's in the news lately: guns. If you're my age or younger, you probably think of guns as a pretty hardline partisan issue. Liberals are for gun control, and thus the Democratic Party has taken up that stance, and conservatives are against it, which is why the Republican Party, at least in theory, is officially opposed to it. That's an oversimplification, of course, but it's definitely true that the Second Amendment in the past wasn't nearly as partisan or sharply ideological as it is now. Consider this. In 1967, 30 members of the Black Panthers stood outside the California State House, openly armed with shotguns and pistols. The time has come for black people to arm themselves, these advocates said. Lawmakers were so frightened by this protest that the California Assembly quickly passed the Mulford Act, which prohibited the public carrying of loaded firearms without a permit. This bill was signed into law by then-Governor, Republican Ronald Reagan. This legislation was supported by the NRA at the time, and it wasn't a one-off. As Adam Winkler wrote in his book Gunfight: The Battle Over the Right to Bear Arms, this law was part of a wave of laws that were passed in the late 1960s regulating guns, especially to target African Americans, including the Gun Control Act of 1968, which adopted new laws prohibiting certain people from owning guns, proving for beefed-up licensing and inspections of gun dealers, and restricting the importations of cheap Saturday night specials, pocket pistols, that were popular in some urban communities. Recently, Salon tweeted out an article in favor of this. The account tweeted, "When Ronald Reagan's racism saved lives, armed black men meant immediate gun control." The account has since deleted the tweet. The Black Panthers are a Marxist-Leninist black power organization. They were at their height during this time when race relations were far worse than they are now. They, rather understandably, given the context of the time, had an adversarial relationship with the state, which is a pretty consistent through line for Second Amendment enthusiasts. Given the way the population is currently distributed, most of the hardline anti-government types live outside cities. Typically, when trying to win over these types, Democrats talk about guns in the context of hunting.
I can guarantee you the majority of people that I grew up with in the Deep South who go hunting every fall, who have been hunting their entire life, would agree with me.
Exactly. I always say my Uncle Dick doesn't need an AR-15 in his deer stand, and he's hunted his whole life.
A lot of the pro-Second Amendment people I know do hunt, and certainly do care about guns for these purposes. But for most of them, that's not what's most important. It's about self-defense, including, if necessary, defense from the government. Now, maybe you think taking on the government is kooky Alex Jones level stuff. And maybe you're right, but consider the fact that when you live in the country, law enforcement is usually a lot further away than it is for folks who live in the city. And should there be any trouble, the cops will probably take a lot longer to respond. In other words, if you're in the country, you're probably not going to be able to rely on someone else to come help you. That's one of the big reasons why guns are more popular in the sticks. Finally, I want to close by talking about a video I saw from the Gravel Institute. The video features socialist tech writer Paris Marx talking about electric cars. And surprisingly, it's actually pretty good. Electric cars have serious trade-offs, and these trade-offs are usually not discussed, especially not in lefty, pro-environment circles. At the end of the video, they unwittingly encroach upon identity. Listen to what they consider to be the real problem and what they deem to be the solution.
So the problem is not the type of car. The problem is the car itself and the entire infrastructure. The highways and freeways, the suburbs, the spread out shopping centers that are built around the personal vehicle. The problem is car dependency.
If you need to drive everywhere you need to go, then obviously that requires a lot more energy than if you were just able to walk or bike or something like that, because where the place that you're looking to go is so much closer than what it would be in a suburban kind of environment.
A significant increase in people taking the bus or the subway or the train would do much more to reduce emissions than replacing every gas car with an electric one. More public transit requires real investment, but it's not impossible.
The total emissions that are produced by that are so much lower than if everyone is driving their own vehicle or even their own electric vehicle, because the battery minerals required are so much less. The production is so much less, and that does require rethinking the way that we construct communities.
It's true that 50 people on a bus have a lower carbon footprint than 50 people driving in 50 cars. The automobile, of course, is an extremely important part of American identity, and it has been for a very long time. The car is probably the single biggest factor contributing to urban sprawl over time. I've heard a hypothesis that leftists favor trains over cars because trains allow planners to decide where people go, whereas cars grant people the freedom to go where they want. That's an interesting idea that would be cool to explore in its own right, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I want to talk about how they literally want to design society in such a way that caters to people who live in cities. Now, I should start out by saying that I was born and raised in a city of about 600,000 people. I don't currently live in a city, but that's the sort of environment that I'm most comfortable in. I currently live in a small town in the middle of the country. And I can say that most people here have very different needs, and that the Gravel Institution's designs on society would not work here. While this isn't always true, a person's vehicle choices tend to be a reflection of their needs. After all, there's a reason why minivans became the vehicle of choice among soccer moms. People here in small-town America, especially those who live in the country but work in town, require larger, more durable vehicles. Driving 30 miles on a county highway on a winter day is a lot easier in a truck than it is in a Prius. Take away, or even make more expensive, someone's choice in a larger vehicle, and you're not necessarily taking away their ability to live such a lifestyle, you're just making it a lot harder. I want to close by pointing out that this works the other way as well. One time I had to take my old car, a 2001 Honda Accord, to the shop. Its repairs were going to take a couple of days, so the dealership paid for my rental. The rental agency gave me a free upgrade, a brand new Ford F-150. I had always wanted a heavy-duty truck, because, well, they're cool, so I was super excited. However, after just a few hours of driving it around, I really wanted my Accord back. It's not that the truck wasn't awesome, it was. It's that driving that tank down the narrow streets of the east side of Milwaukee was a complete nightmare. Parking it, I had to park on the street at all times, even for my apartment, was an even bigger nightmare. It simply wasn't a practical vehicle for my lifestyle at the time. There's a reason why most people who live and work in the city, as I did, drove compact cars or took public transportation. The United States is a very big country, with plenty of big cities and large swaths of sparsely populated land between them. And that's fine. We are a diverse country in every sense of the word. And that's also fine. These are some of the things I love most about my country. There's no reason why one country can't have all of these things, and that the people with very different values and priorities cannot live in the same land. But it does make it way more difficult when you introduce politics into the equation. Politics is zero-sum. When you insist on pooling resources of all these different people, then spending it in ways that support one lifestyle or another, and enforcing it all at the point of a gun, you necessarily put these different lifestyle choices in competition, and therefore in opposition to each other. Politics necessarily leads to competition and conflict between identities.